What if World War III starts tomorrow? Imagine this. You wake up to the sound of urgent news alerts. Your phone vibrates nonstop. Social media is in chaos, and every channel you turn on is flashing red banners. World War III has begun. It is no longer speculation, no longer a headline for historians to debate about or for filmmakers to dramatize. It is happening right now. The world, as we know it, has crossed the line into global war. But what would this actually mean for humanity? How would governments react? How would economies collapse? How would ordinary people survive? And what would our planet look like in the aftermath? Today, we take a deep dive into the scenario no one wants to imagine, but everyone fears. What if World War III starts tomorrow? First, let us establish the context. The 20th century already gave us two global wars. World War I devastated Europe, cost millions of lives, and reshaped empires. World War II was even deadlier, unleashing the horror of atomic weapons. For decades after 1945, the phrase World War III has hovered in the background of human imagination, often associated with nuclear holocaust and mutual destruction. During the Cold War, entire generations grew up under the shadow of this possibility. But the war never came. Humanity stayed on the edge, but never crossed it. Now, in our modern interconnected world, the risks are different, but no less frightening. So what happens on day one? Governments across the globe move into emergency mode. NATO members call urgent meetings under Article 5. Russia, China, and their allies hold their own summits. Nuclear arsenals go on high alert. Fighter jets fill the skies. Warships change course. Borders close. Millions of soldiers are mobilized, while millions of civilians are glued to their screens, waiting to see whether bombs will fall. Social media becomes both a lifeline and a weapon, flooded with real news, fake news, propaganda, and cyber attacks. Stock markets crash within hours. The price of oil skyrockets. Ordinary people rush to supermarkets, emptying shelves of food and water. Panic spreads faster than missiles. The first phase of World War III would likely not even be traditional battles. It would begin in cyberspace. Power grids would go dark, banks would freeze, satellites could be disabled. Imagine waking up and finding no internet, no electricity, no access to your savings. Entire cities could be paralyzed without a single shot fired. This is the new front line of warfare in the 21st century. But cyberwar would not stay alone for long. Missile strikes and drone attacks would follow. Cities with military bases, communication hubs, and industrial centers would become instant targets. In Europe, capitals like Warsaw, Berlin, and London could find themselves under threat. In Asia, Seoul, Tokyo, and Taipei would prepare for the unthinkable. In the Middle East, strategic oil facilities would be bombed. The Pacific and Atlantic Oceans would fill with submarines carrying nuclear warheads. Within just a few days, the war would no longer be regional. It would be truly global. Now imagine the human cost. Refugee flows would explode. Millions of families would flee bombed cities, crowding into neighboring countries already struggling with their own crises. Airports would be overwhelmed. Trains would be packed with desperate people. Highways would turn into rivers of cars, all moving in one direction, away from danger. Governments would impose martial law, curfews, rationing of food and fuel. Fear would become the new normal. The humanitarian crisis would be unlike anything we've ever seen. The wars in Syria, Iraq, or Ukraine gave us a glimpse of mass displacement, but a third world war would multiply that by 10, even by 100. The United Nations, humanitarian organizations, and charities would simply be unable to cope. Camps would overflow. Hospitals would run out of supplies. Medicine would be scarce. And then there's the specter of nuclear weapons. Right now, 9 countries possess them. The United States, Russia, China, the United Kingdom, France, India, Pakistan, Israel, and North Korea. Together, they have more than 13,000 warheads. Even a small fraction of these would be enough to devastate the planet. If World War III escalates beyond conventional weapons, and leaders give the order to launch, The result could be a nuclear winter, a scenario where smoke and dust from massive detonations block sunlight, lower global temperatures, and collapse food systems worldwide. Billions, not millions, could die. This is the nightmare that has haunted humanity since 1945. But even without nuclear war, the economic collapse would be catastrophic. Global trade would grind to a halt. Container ships would stop sailing. Airlines would be grounded. Oil supplies from the Middle East could be cut. Energy prices would soar. The stock markets would not just dip, they would collapse completely. Ordinary people would see their savings vanish overnight. Unemployment would skyrocket. Inflation would spiral out of control. A loaf of bread could cost a day's wage. The Great Depression of the 1930s would look mild in comparison. Technology, often seen as humanity's savior, could become its greatest weapon. Autonomous drones, artificial intelligence systems capable of hacking, predicting, and even deciding military moves. Satellites with precision-guided weapons. Hypersonic missiles that travel faster than 5 times the speed of sound. These are not science fiction. These are technologies already being developed and tested today. In a third world war, they would be unleashed on a scale we have never seen. And civilians, not just soldiers, would be the targets. Culturally and psychologically, the impact would be profound. Generations who grew up with relative peace in much of the world would suddenly find themselves living in conditions their grandparents only told stories about. Children would grow up in bomb shelters instead of classrooms. Families would be separated by borders and battle lines. Communities would fracture under the pressure of fear and propaganda. Trust would erode, not only between nations, but between neighbors. Religions and ideologies would play their part too. Some groups would interpret World War III as a sign of the end times. Prophecies would be revived. Apocalyptic movements could gain followers. For others, the war would reinforce nationalism, tribalism, and division. Hate crimes and scapegoating could rise as people look for someone to blame for their suffering. And what of the environment? Even without nuclear exchanges, a third world war would devastate ecosystems. Bombing campaigns would destroy forests and rivers. Oil spills from sunken tankers would poison oceans. Industrial facilities hit by missiles could leak toxic chemicals. Global warming would accelerate as military machinery burns unimaginable amounts of fuel. Entire regions could become uninhabitable, not only because of violence, but because of environmental collapse. If the war dragged on for years, civilization as we know it might unravel. Governments could collapse under the strain. Famine could spread. Pandemics might follow as healthcare systems break down and sanitation fails. The global population could shrink, not just from fighting, but from hunger and disease. The 21st century could resemble the Dark Ages, with pockets of survivors trying to rebuild amidst ruins. And yet, amidst all this horror, history suggests that even after great wars, peace eventually returns. If World War III were to end, what kind of world would emerge from the ashes? Perhaps new powers would rise, while old ones fade away. Perhaps new alliances would be born out of necessity. Maybe humanity would finally realize the cost of its violence and build institutions strong enough to prevent another global catastrophe. After all, the United Nations itself was created after World War II to try to stop future conflicts. Could a world government or stronger international order arise after World War III? It is possible. Alternatively, the opposite could happen. Instead of unity, fragmentation. Instead of cooperation, endless cycles of revenge. The war to end all wars could simply be the war that ends civilization itself. So, what can we learn from imagining this nightmare? That World War III, if it starts tomorrow, would not be a repeat of the past. It would be faster, more destructive, and far more global than anything humanity has ever faced. It would involve not just soldiers and battlefields, but every aspect of modern life. Finance, technology, communication, energy, and even space. The victims would not only be those caught in bombings or gunfire, but billions affected by hunger, poverty, and displacement. And the most terrifying part? Once it begins, No one can predict how far it will go or how it will end. The only true safeguard is prevention, diplomacy, dialogue, de-escalation. These words may sound weak compared to missiles and tanks, but they are humanity's only chance to avoid self-destruction. World War III is not inevitable, but the risks are real. By imagining this scenario, we remind ourselves why peace matters, why compromise matters, why leaders must choose negotiation over confrontation. So next time you hear someone casually say, World War III is coming, remember what it truly means. It is not just a headline. It is not just a meme. It is the collapse of everything we take for granted. Light at the flip of a switch, food in a store, safety in our homes. What if World War III starts tomorrow? The answer is simple and chilling. Humanity may not survive it. But by imagining it today, maybe, just maybe, we can stop it from ever happening.